So what you're telling me is that it wasn't exactly Agatha all along.
No, it wasn't literally me, just my eyes and ears.
Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor here at Cinemablend, back with another episode recap and analysis for WandaVision, and we are up to episode number 8, titled Previously On. What an amazing episode. I am devastated by the number of things that it laid out, and I cannot wait to discuss all of the incredible things that this show is doing. You guys have to understand, I am putting the totality of WandaVision right up there with these guys. Like, it is achieving an accomplishment that mirrors what was pulled off in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame for me. Just for the full amount of stuff that it is unveiling, and why I'm so blown away by where this show has gone in the second half. Let's dive into the analysis. Of course, this is going to be loaded with spoilers for not just episode 8 of WandaVision, but all of the stuff that we have seen up until this point. We're going to get into some really deep analysis into things that have happened in the MCU, so if you haven't yet caught up with the latest episode of WandaVision, make sure that you back out of this right now and go check out some of our other videos scattered throughout Cinemablend. Okay, so it's worth noting that this episode just abandons the sitcom format that has been relevant to WandaVision up until this point. And it's time. It was time to get away from it now at this point. And this separates what I'm seeing is a really significant divide between the people who sort of have fallen out of love with WandaVision because they really enjoyed seeing the two Avengers in the sitcom format, in manipulating the recognizability of the sitcoms from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and we get an explanation as to why Wanda is doing that in this episode. But part of the reason why I have been more invested in the second half of the season and why I needed to know the relevance, of the sitcom template, essentially, like why that needed to make sense, is because I care about Wanda. Like, I care about Wanda and Vision as characters, and I'm invested in their journey and their emotional journey, and I didn't want to just see them as a gimmick where they are set up in a sitcom and having to live their lives through certain things. Like, that has to be happening for a reason. So everything that sort of come from the moment where we learned about S.W.O.R.D and we learned about why Wanda has created the Hex and why she's recreated this life for Vision and the mystery of whether she's being manipulated or not. Like, I'm on board with all of that stuff. I think that stuff is fantastic. And that's the kind of thing that I want the show to explore. And that's exactly why I found this episode to be so compelling, because it was explaining and filling in some of the details about why this stuff was happening to Wanda, and it wasn't just the gimmick of the sitcoms. So I think that helps explain why people that I've been seeing online, people who've been discussing this, have been really torn about why they feel that either WandaVision has ascended and gotten better, because if you're invested in the character arcs, if you're invested in what is happening to these characters who you've grown to love over the course of their introduction into the MCU, then the story has only improved and pulled in from some deep resources. Like, we opened up an episode in Salem, Massachusetts, and the MCU just introduced witchcraft. Like, they were like, hey, there are witches now. And like, that blows my mind that they were able to do this. And in addition to the fact that they have also introduced a new character with Tiana Paris, and the fact that there is a new villain in Agatha Harkness, and, the mid-credit sequence of Vision still being in control of S.W.O.R.D. Like, there's so much going on here, and I'm invested in all of those characters. So I needed it to evolve beyond the sitcom. There was no theme song this week, and I thought all of that stuff it's fine. It's okay to move past that. It was a great entranceway into this story, but by this point now, and setting up the finale that we're going to get next week, this is where we need to be. And I think that it's fantastic that WandaVision is completely doubling down on its character development and pushing the story forward. Which brings us to our second point, which is filling in Wanda's story. This is mind-blowing to me because this is one of those classic sort of monologuing situations where the villain establishes what's been going on this whole time, and we sort of walk our way back through the plot and trace back through some of the things that we learned. Classic villain monologuing. Not even that Agatha is the full-blown villain in this sense, because it's really funny that, the last episode ended with the theme song, very memorable theme song that people latched onto about it being Agatha all along. But it's not Agatha all along. It's been Wanda. And Agatha has essentially been drawn to the Hex because of the extreme amount of power, of magic, of sorcery that Wanda has exhibited in creating the Hex of Westview.
What's your secret, sister?
It's funny, the show is sort of ping-ponged back and forth to Monica Rambeau saying, like, it's Wanda. It was Wanda the whole time. Getting, kicked out of the hex and talking about the emptiness and the void that she felt being inside there. But then you don't want to believe that it's been Wanda who's been responsible for this the entire time. So you want a reason, and then they give you a reason, and they're like, it's Agatha. Agatha's pulling her strings. Agatha's the one that's making Wanda do all this stuff. But Agatha kind of just wanted to find out who did it to Wanda. And we learn ultimately that it was Wanda, that it was her grief. And we're going to get to grief in the next section. But in doing so, the show rewrites a ton of really important things that we thought we knew about Wanda from the MCU. And it makes me question how much Marvel knew about what they wanted to do with Scarlet Witch up until this point. This specifically, we believed that Wanda's powers and Pietro's powers were created by the Mind Stone and their experiments with Hydra. Although we didn't get a lot of explanation about that in Age of Ultron, they were at least viewed to be people who were radicalized because of the Star technology bomb that destroyed their apartment and killed their parents. They were anti-Stark. They grew up with the rebellion in Sokovia, but Hydra experiments unlocked their powers. WandaVision now says to us that Wanda had those powers to begin with, that she used her magic, her manipulation of probability to stop the Stark bomb from exploding, and it was her that did it. And goes on to explain that it was her exposure to the Infinity Stones that further enhanced her powers, but she had them all along. I would love to know, and hopefully somebody at Marvel will be able to explain this to us at some point, whether when Marvel introduced Wanda in Age of Ultron, if they knew that then, or if they kind of thought her origin story was going to be, no, she was experimented on by Hydra, and that's where her powers come from. Because if you go back and say that she had them all this time, that's when you can start talking about mutation. Because Scarlet Witch in the comics is a mutant, and she has her powers. She was born with her powers from mutation. WandaVision almost hints a little bit that in filling in the cracks of Wanda's backstory that she was born a witch, maybe in the way that Agatha was born a witch. And at the end of the episode, in a moment where I screamed out loud in just geek overwhelmingness, she gets her comic book name.
The Scarlet Witch.
She's a myth, according to Agatha. Like, she is someone who has the ability to manipulate all of this stuff. Agatha's essentially in awe of the amount of stuff that Wanda has been able to do. Well, now we're learning she was born with the power. That hints at mutation, the possibility of mutation. It also gets around to a theory that I've brought up in the videos before, that Wanda ultimately in the MCU might be the one who is responsible for the birth of mutations, the launch of the mutant population. And I do think her expanding the Hex is going to have consequences. What we're learning is that everything in the MCU, which makes me think again that they are planning ahead to a level that we've not seen anybody be able to do. Everything has consequences. Like, there's a reason that commercial was for Lagos, which is a reference to the mistake that she made at the beginning of Civil War. That flashing light on the toaster absolutely is the flashing red light that was on the side of the Stark bomb that landed in their Sokovia apartment on TV night. Oh, my heart broke for little Wanda, who was just so excited to watch Dick Van Dyke with her family. And, that I think that had been sort of mentioned before in interviews, but people might not have picked up on the sitcom world that Wanda creates is really truly born out of the grief that she still had from the death of her family. And there was that moment when Agatha just listed off all the people who had been killed in Wanda's history, her parents, her brother, her soulmate. Of course she's devastated by all this, which brings us to our third point. What is grief? Let me read the actual quote. What is grief if not love persevering? This is such an emotional story. If you have investment in the characters of Wanda and Vision, of which I deeply, deeply do. And it's really interesting to me in that, as a Marvel fan, as a diehard MCU fan, I care about all of the characters. But if I ranked them on a tier of how much I'm invested in their ongoing stories in the MCU, Wanda and Vision would have been lower, admittedly, before this show. The show has done an incredible job of making me care a whole lot more about characters that I was invested in, but didn't realize how much I really wanted to buy into their story. Like, this is a tremendous love story. This is a tremendous story about grief. And the fact that we watched Wanda, the other scene where I literally screamed out loud in my house in despair was her looking down at the corpse of Vision being dissected. On the surface level, it makes sense. Like, of course, he's a high-tech being. He is a weapon, the way that S.W.O.R.D describes him. Like, I know she doesn't perceive him that way. She shouldn't perceive him that way. To her, he's Vision. He's the person who's been there with him, and that points to that scene that Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany have in the bedroom at the Avengers complex, where they bond, where they're literally seeing each other essentially for the first time and helping each other sort of figure out their place in this world. I mean, this is the episode that like Marvel Studios needs to send to the Emmy committee, right? Because all three of the leads just crushed it. Like, Kathryn Hahn was amazing. Elizabeth Olsen was off the charts amazing. Paul Bettany took the most advantage of all of his scenes, being able to play an earlier version of Vision from the MCU to show the establishment of the relationship between Wanda and Vision that is the emotional bedrock of this entire series. Like, if you don't buy into their love, of which is very, very palpable, then you don't buy into the launch of when Wanda collapses and births Westview. The magic is coming all from her heart, and her heart is broken. Her heart is broken that she's lost her true love, and she comes up with the only way that she can think of to bring him back, to set up this alternate universe. So it was Wanda. It was Wanda, and Wanda essentially lured Agatha to Westview so Agatha could figure out what was going on. I loved the backstory in Salem with Agatha to show just how powerful she was. What a quick introduction to her mother. What a fascinating sort of reveal that was of the Coven, of just how strong she is. I love the way that the show uses color to show power. If you go back and rewatch, you can see the opening logo for Marvel Studios turns from red to purple very quickly before it fades away. There's a moment when Wanda is running outside to see the twins, her boys at the end, when they're completely under Agatha's control, and Agatha goes through yet another transformation to look even more like a witch, and Wanda deliberately runs past purple flowers to almost show that, like, oh, Agatha's influence over Westview is expanding, and it's probably maybe becoming more her world than it even is Wanda's, and that would hint a little bit too to Wanda losing control of the things that are going on in the Hex, and the Hex a little bit glitching out. I wonder how much of that power struggle is going back and forth between Wanda and Agatha, but of course Wanda's going to prevail. Like, I mean, we're heading into a finale where Wanda's going to have the upper hand over Agatha. I'm fully convinced about that. It brings us to a theory too that we're going to bat around and almost write about on Cinemablend, that in the mid-credits sequence we get the revelation that the Vision inside the Hex is not a resurrected corpse of that Wanda took from S.W.O.R.D, and that Wanda actually left S.W.O.R.D and left Vision there because she couldn't feel him anymore. Also devastating. Imagine standing over the body of a loved one and having to come to terms finally with the fact that they're not there anymore, right? Like, that you just can't, you don't connect with them anymore and you have to leave. The emotions that are on display in WandaVision episode 8 are off the charts great, and the acting and the writing and everything contributes to the reason of why they are so phenomenal. So we learn that the Vision that we've been watching in the show this whole time has not been the resurrected corpse, which is odd because we do see how he flashed dead in episode, I want to say it was 4. But that brings us around to Paul Bettany teasing a cameo or a performance or somebody that he wants to, that he has wanted to act alongside his entire life. And if you go back and reread that quote, he talks about how there's a character that hasn't been revealed yet, and it's somebody he's wanted to act with his entire time, and he believes that he has amazing chemistry with this person. And I'm starting to wonder if he was being very cheeky and describing the fact that in the final episode, Wanda's Hex Vision is going to have to face off against S.W.O.R.D's resurrected Vision, who has been brought to life using some of the power that was left on the drone that Wanda threw back to Hayward. So there's going to be 2 Visions, assumedly. And so I wonder if Paul Bettany, everyone's been speculating, oh, it's Magneto, oh, it's Charles Xavier. What if it's not? What if it's none of them? Oh, it's Mephisto. What if it's none of those people? What if it's literally just 2 Visions, and Paul Bettany has always wanted to act alongside Paul Bettany, and Paul Bettany says, like, I think our chemistry was spectacular, and he's being Paul Bettany. He's being cheeky and charming, and fans did what fans do. Guilty as charged, of taking that and running with it in as much speculation as possible. So final point that I want to talk about is why Wanda potentially is going to be showing up in Doctor Strange. So, I mean, we know that she's in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But the theme that was laid out throughout the course of episode 8 is that Wanda is unfamiliar with how powerful she actually is. Like, there's times throughout the episode where Agatha is essentially like, don't you even know, like, who you are or what you can do? And no, Wanda clearly doesn't. You know, the Infinity Stone enhanced her abilities, and we can talk about mutants, and we will probably talk about mutants, or she could just be a witch in the MCU. That might be the origin of, of her powers, essentially. And it could be that the Infinity Stone just boosted her ability. Like, who did she see? I don't know who she saw in the vision. When she looked into the Infinity Stone and a shape was coming at her, the shape looked like a witch, but I'm really curious who that was. And I wonder if we're going to get an answer to that. That answer might be saved for Doctor Strange, because if Wanda is able to triumph over Agatha, but she's left at the end with a loss, essentially, still, where she's like, yes, I created this artificial reality for me and Vision to live in, and I gave us a family, but the twins aren't really twins, and well, I'm still torn on that one too. She might turn around and say, like, I need help from somebody who would understand all of this, who can help me take the path forward, and that would push her to Doctor Strange. That she would go to the Sorcerer Supreme. And it's a little bit odd, I guess, then, at that point, since we're going back over the MCU and sort of figuring out, like, who knew what and when did they know it, why Doctor Strange wouldn't recognize the power in Wanda. They would have crossed paths briefly in Endgame, because they were both at the final battle, but not enough that Doctor Strange could have at least, been privy to the amount of power that Wanda had. So, all right, I'll give that a pass. They haven't really crossed paths just yet, extensively enough that Stephen Strange would be able to know exactly what's going on with Wanda Maximoff. But I think that's the catalyst for what's sending Wanda over to Doctor Strange Part 2, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. She's going to want to figure out, like, what's the extent of her power. That might be, not to keep throwing out to when are we going to see Mephisto, but if it's called In the Multiverse of Madness, then Doctor Strange experimenting with Wanda Maximoff and opening up the multiverse and maybe getting exposed to Mephisto. So much to process from episode number 8. I don't want to necessarily go out and call this the best episode of the season, but it's clearly the episode where the most stuff happened. Like all of the cards are sort of getting laid on the table here now at this point. And that was my my breakdown and analysis, gut reaction to episode 8. We will be back for episode 9, the season finale. Series finale? I wonder if there's going to be more WandaVision or if this is just it. We'll figure it out together. I'll see you back here next week on Cinemablend. If you're on the YouTube channel, hit subscribe. Turn on your notifications. That way, the minute that these videos are done, you can come over here and watch them and figure out what's going on with WandaVision with me.